All right, Indian Motorcycle's been making quite a splash lately. 2013, we saw the new Chief and Chieftain, and this year in Sturgis, an entirely new platform, the Indian Scout. It's got a cast aluminum frame and a liquid-cooled engine. It's directed primarily at Harley-Davidson's venerable Sportster, but it's a more advanced engine, means it's got a lot more power than the Sportster. So we thought, well, we got to make this class bigger. And so we've got a 7-bike shootout for you here today. So when we looked at competitors, we looked at price, we looked at displacement, and we also looked at performance. And so we've got a couple of Japanese competitors, about 1300 cc. Over there we got some more Americans. We got the Indian's cousin, the Victory Gunner, and another liquid-cooled 60-degree V-twin, the Harley-Davidson V-Rod. And then behind us is Moto Guzzi's California 1400. Evans, take us through some more details of these.
Well, I think we should really start with the Indian because that's what prompted this test. I mean, it's the smallest displacement bike we have here. It's also one of the lightest bikes we have here and the second least expensive. But what does that get you for that? You get a really nicely performing liquid-cooled 60-degree V-twin, 4 valves per cylinder. It ranks, despite being the smallest displacement, second in terms of horsepower delivery and third in terms of overall torque. And that's up against bikes like the Gunner, which is a 1700 cc motorcycle. So this bike is clearly punching out of its class. This is the 800-pound Gorilla. Cruisers are designed around Harley-Davidsons. I mean, from the style of the engine, the V-twin, everything. When you explain what a cruiser is to a non-motorcyclist, you say, you know, the ones that look like Harley-Davidsons. This had to be here. I mean, they've been selling this bike to generations of riders. So Indian was clearly gunning to take this bike down a notch. We're trying to define a class. So I say we toss all these bikes together, shake them around a little, and see where they end up at the end of the ride. Great ride, huh?
Yeah, great.
We're back here after a day of riding. We've gathered at the famous Cook's Corner motorcycle watering hole, and they've graciously allowed us to gather in the back out of sight so that we can talk about these 7 V-twin motorcycles. Ready, set, go.
We definitely should start the Scout. The Scout is the thing that brought all these together and a diverse lineup of bikes. All V-twins, but really each has their own personalities, right?
My experience on the Indian is, and you know, I rode it back in Sturgis, is the more I ride it, the more comfortable I feel on it. I like its power delivery. I think it's really peppy, especially after getting off the Moto Guzzi, which isn't slow by any means, but just the difference in heft. I mean, we're talking almost 200 pounds difference.
And you can feel it.
And you know, there's a difference in length, a difference in heft. So getting on the Scout almost feels like I'm stepping onto a sport bike.
So for a first effort, the Indian Scout's a good bike. You know, it's got a good engine, but I think it radiates a lot of heat out of that rear cylinder. That exhaust kind of goes right by your leg, and it just roasted me during our ride. I don't know about you guys, but I imagine it's the same thing. I've noticed on D-Cell, I expect big V-twin engine deceleration from it, and it kind of just coasts when I get off the throttle, and I just got to get used to that feeling. When I ride a cruiser, I expect when I get off the throttle, it's going to get this big booming V-twin engine braking effect.
I think that's a modern electronics trick more than anything.
Yeah,
you know, they
can,
sort
I'm
of
sure,
carry just a
tunable
little bit
thing.
of throttle and keep it from falling on its face when you chop the throttle.
I'm sure it's a tunable thing, but the steering lock from side to side is really shallow on it, and especially today when we're doing photo passes and making U-turns, you're really conscious of how narrow that steering lock is.
Yeah, it'd be a good dirt tracker except for that.
Right? But again, I gotta give Indian props for having a good first effort with that Scout. You know, there's definitely room for improvement, but as a first as the first effort goes, it's pretty good.
But that's not the only bike that has heat issues, right? We were riding
of course
today.
not.
Today was
Correct.
hot, and most of these bikes had heat issues. So it's not just the Indian. I think it'd be unfair to charge it with that and not talk about the other one.
No, I think the V-Rod wins the prize for having the most heat because of that header that comes out and then follows your thigh for a foot forward and then loops back by your ankle.
And the Victory's no picnic either, especially the rear cylinder on the right side. And you know, on the Indian, I had two items of harsh criticism for it, one being the rear suspension and the other being the incredibly light throttle return spring. I think at 10.9, a set of shocks and a heavier throttle return spring, and you've got the best cruiser you could buy if you like to ride dynamically proficient motorcycles. And probably, I mean, heat aside, cruising motor of the year. You know, if we had such a category, I would give it. It's a great motor.
I was going to say the same thing. It seems like I think it's the least expensive bike here, isn't it? A little bit less than 11,000. So
the Harley is the least expensive, and
The Sportster.
Yeah, the Sportster, but it's only the Indian's only $350 more, so that's small potatoes.
So yeah, I was going to say you could get a nice roll of heat wrap the header, get some good shocks for the back of it, and you're like most of the way there to solving its problems. And for a first-year motorcycle, it's pretty impressive to me.
I gotta also add my vote to that motor. It's fantastic, and with its power to weight ratio, for it to be coming close to drag racing with a night rod or a 1700 and some cc Victory gunner, that's very impressive.
I would agree that Indian has, concocted a really nice motorcycle with the Scout.
And it looks great.
And it does. I mean, it looks good. It runs good. It's got performance. I mean, it beats the Sportster 1200. Big deal. It's not like that's a really high bar to get to.
Careful.
But the thing is, what I was thinking though is like, I look at the Harley and it sits there at a stoplight and it shakes and you can hear the engine, all the mechanicals going. The Indian has the liquid cooling, so it's got the water jacket, everything's quiet, it's got a really nice exhaust noise. But it doesn't vibrate. It doesn't have any of that, Sons of Anarchy stuff that a customer is going to, be drawn to with the Harley. Because the Indian is, it's good, but it doesn't have that kind of quintessential V-twin Americana to it.
The Sportster was super neutral and well balanced and light steering, and it felt a lot like a standard motorcycle. I mean, it didn't really feel, it looks choppery, but it didn't feel choppery, and was really fun to ride at low to medium speed, particularly if you're making turns and stuff.
Put any force into it at speed though, and you definitely feel the chassis immediately start to flex, and then it kicks back.
Yeah, of course. But that's been true of that chassis forever. But the thing is, a well-ridden Sportster in a canyon or whatever, once you know what not to do with it, it actually works amazingly well.
If you're like riding around town doing the coffee bar
it's great.
hopping thing, it's a great motorcycle. It's very light to steer, and that motor gives you that power without having to rev it out.
Let's step up to the vibration at the stoplight, because that's something I thought about a lot, particularly when I was riding the Moto Guzzi. Vibration, yeah, because that bike, the engine is just silky smooth. I mean, it's otherworldly smooth out on the road. But then you pull it up to the stoplight, it's I swear I think they've messed with the ignition timing just to make it shake more. I think its vibrations rival that of the Harley.
I'm not sure they do that on purpose. I think that's just a byproduct of having a transverse crank in a V12.
I think they do it on purpose.
I think they do it on purpose because it happens right as you hit idle speed. Yeah, get it to above walking speed in first gear, and all of a sudden, it's almost electrical. Yeah,
it's an Italian cigarette butt stuck down there in the crank somewhere.
And I really like that engine too.
The Guzzi is the bike that I would personally take cross country. It's the heaviest, that's a limiting factor in terms of performance, but I mean, comfort-wise, it's got cruise control. It does have, traction control and ABS. And I mean, you get out there and it's just, other than it is a little wide, and for taller guys like Sean, yeah, you're gonna, hit your knees up against those cylinders, but I'm 5'11", I'm I think right on the cusp of it still being comfortable for me. And I mean, I really like that bike.
Of the large displacement air-cooled twins, we've got the Victory over there, right? And the Guzzi's great if you rev it out. You get up in the upper mid-range and the top end, then you have this Italian sporting motor. In the real world, it's not in that rev range unless you're on a freeway. And so riding around, that Victory feels way ballsier than the Guzzi does when you're riding normally.
Victory offers a factory optional rear suspension that gives you an inch more ride height.
Over at Portola Springs Dragway, it did really come in third, I think both times.
It was
Yeah,
operator error. Huh?
It's surprisingly quick for a traditional air-cooled V-twin. And it looks fantastic.
Yeah.
It really looks good.
Star, maybe of this bunch, is the most underrated bike here, in my opinion. The Indian, rightfully so, is getting a lot of attention, but the Star is really good. It's got a great engine. I love the engine. It's not, very powerful in this bunch. Like the Star doesn't outshine any of these bikes in any one particular category.
It's a dim Star.
It's a burning out Star. Yeah. It doesn't outshine any of these bikes in one particular category, but as a sum of its parts, I really dig it. I mean, I think it's comfortable. I like the engine. I like its character. I like the brakes. I like so much about that Star, but it looks bland.
It's relentlessly competent. It doesn't outshine anything, but it does everything really, really nicely.
It could be the most well-rounded motorcycle here as far as if you needed to do anything on a motorcycle. And speaking of bland, what do you guys think of the Honda?
Technically excellent.
Yeah, it lacks a little bit of front-end braking power, technically. But what I thought was funny, because again, in terms of being disparate, that bike has got the big beach cruiser bars on it. It's got the longest wheelbase, and it's like an old dial-up internet connection. You start to put some input in the bars, and it takes a while to get down to that front wheel before it starts going around the corner.
It's a bitchin' style bike 6 years ago, and now that things aren't raked out like that, it's a little bit of an odd duck. The fuel injection's perfect. Like everything on it works superbly well. And I have to say, if you're a full-size guy that insists on buying a full-size bike as a first bike or something like that, it'd be pretty hard to argue against it. I think Harley would argue that the Sportster looks the most custom of the bikes here, but really, I think sitting in a lot, the Honda looks like the most custom bike out of all of them. And it's funny because it's quite possibly personality-wise the most vanilla of all of them.
Okay, I think we also got to talk about the Night Rod, right? Because that is a very special bike. It costs a lot more, especially than the Scout or the Sportster. And it's a really fun bike because that engine rocks. But to me, that fat-back tire, it dynamically spoils what is really a pretty good package.
But you'll get used to it. If you own that bike, 3 months later, it's just second nature. I don't think, we struggle with it because we're getting off of more normal size rear tires. So you feel it immediately.
And the engine, has gobs of power anywhere.
Sounds great. Great intake howl, It's a good bike. It just needs a normal rear tire.
And that's the thing that's nice about the Indian too. The Honda is a perfectly nice motorcycle. The Yamaha is a perfectly nice motorcycle. And the V-Rod, it does have a little weird because of the back tire. But if you hop off of any of those three onto the Scout, that weighs, what does it weigh? 462, like 6 pounds less than the Sportster. Yeah, 562, less than the Sportster. This is the lightest bike here. And when you jump on it, you can tell it's like 100 pounds less than any of those other bikes.
It's physically
and
small.
if you were going to travel somewhere, maybe not the best one, but it's the Scout for like around town, around short hops and stuff, and you can feel the missing weight. And once you fix the suspension and the other couple things, man, it's just like it's a different category of motorcycle to me. It's kind of in the category of the Sportster, but to me it blows the Sportster away.
When you guys told me what the bikes were that we were going to be bringing on this shootout today, I thought, how will we ever be able to extrapolate what we need to in order to make a decision as to which one is the best? You have motorcycles here that represent more modern cruising. There's some new technologies involved. It's not new, but the liquid cooling has really taken over. High performance brakes, engines that have a lot of performance packed into them. Then you have cruisers that embrace more traditional aspects, like the Sportster does, and even to a certain extent the Honda. And you have two shaft drive bikes in this. So how are we going to do this? And at the end of the day, what I figured out is that the Indian kind of embodies all of them to a certain extent. It's got an incredibly high performing engine, but it has some heat. It handles extremely well, but the tires aren't the best in my opinion. And it's comfortable, but the suspension kind of holds it back in the rear end. But when you consider all of the things that the Indian is, and it's a first-year effort, and it's going to get better, but it's a really amazing effort by Polaris to pull this bike together in the time that they did, at the price point that they did. I think that the Indian, for me, is the best motorcycle, bar none.
We also have, keep saying that this is a first-year effort with the Indian. It's a first-year effort in the second year that they've been producing new motorcycles, which I think makes it even more impressive. When you bring price into play, that it's got to be the Indian, as for all of its potential and what that low price leaves you to play with in terms of what you can do with the bike.
Performance per dollar, I think the Indian's got it.
I think Game Changer probably applies to it more than we've seen in several years. As a product coming along, it changes the game.
But all the other bikes have their own characteristics that make them appealing in different ways. So for the full story, you got to go to Motorcycle.com. We'll have dyno tests, the full scorecard and everything. So if you're watching on YouTube, navigate to Motorcycle.com, and we'll see you next time.